Hi, my name's Dr. Adam Booth, and this is the first of Quantum Source's Bonfire Week specials. We hope to put some fun in your fireworks and some bang in your bonfire with some fascinating facts and educational entertainment. So today we are talking about fireworks, or more specifically pyrotechnics, and we're thinking about some of the technologies that go into making ever more effective fireworks and, special bangs and booms in the air. So this source is packed full of more oohs and ahs than a Gina G Eurovision submission. And our speaker today is Dr. Lisa Humphreys. She's a research fellow in Formulation Chemistry at Cranfield University, and she specialises in these latest technologies for improving, for revolutionising the way that pyrotechnics are used. So we're going to give her a call in just a second. Now, as with all quantum sources, there's a recommended source for this particular set of fascinating facts, and you're probably going to go out at some point watching some fireworks going off, or maybe, like me, you'll be sat in your back garden sponging off everybody else's firework displays. And what could be better on that cold night than a warming cup of cocoa? Well, I'll tell you what could be better than a warming cup of cocoa. It's a warming cup of cocoa with something just a little bit special added to it. So you get yourself something nice, keep warm, and we'll give Lisa a call. Cheers. And hello, Lisa. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Hi, Adam. How are you doing? I'm really good.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to some fireworks.
Well, I think most people are. It's coming up to that point now, isn't it?
Absolutely. There was one thing I was wondering before we start, and that's that with all of your research looking at fireworks, can you actually still enjoy a fireworks display, or do you spend your time kind of going like, oh, that's a model C45327?
Oh, no. They are still definitely my guilty pleasure. Some of the research I try to do, we try to find different effects as well. So, and we're always trying to get those fine-tuned colours, because obviously quite a few of the fireworks that you see, you're used to seeing those lovely strong greens, strong reds. Blue is a really hard colour to actually get in terms of a firework, in terms of that purity and beautiful colour. So right. That's one of the areas I'm really looking at as well.
All right, so you're looking out for blues. Okay, cool. Now, speaking of guilty pleasures, at Quantum Source, we couldn't possibly recommend that people mix alcohol and fireworks, but can you recommend me a source for bonfire night?
Well, my guilty pleasure is a White Russian. Typically, it's either that or an espresso martini, but weirdly enough, I'm not a coffee drinker, but both of them have that coffee essence. But yeah, enjoy both.
Right, okay, so a very specialist version of coffee, and you're going to be enjoying that a little bit later in the evening, right?
Most definitely, yeah.
Nice one. Right, so research into pyrotechnics then. Let's get you to share your screen and take a look at that.
Okay, so we've got pyrotechnics, the art of fire, because that's roughly what pyrotechnic roughly translates to, the art of fire. So pyro meaning fire, and technique really is art, and art in terms of not just beauty, but also in terms of skill, a discipline.
Which is right, craftiness.
Yeah, craftiness. That's a better way of putting it, actually, yeah. So I wanted to kind of start out with a bit of a definition first. Now, the thing I wanted to say, which is key here, pyrotechnics are actually a group, a subcategory of explosives. So you've got explosives, propellants, and pyrotechnics. Now, of course, explosives are more well known for their sort of destructive output usually. Pyrotechnics are actually used for a whole vast range of different things, which we'll go on to talk about very, very shortly. Okay. Their typical definition is they are materials which produce heat, light, gas, smoke, and or sound by undergoing a self-contained, self-sustaining exothermic chemical reaction. Now, that's a lot of words there. Let's break it down a little bit more. So that exothermic term, that basically means it's a chemical reaction that gives out heat as it progresses. And self-sustaining, another key point, is that it doesn't need anything else for the reaction to progress. So it doesn't need to necessarily draw in any oxygen from the air to continue to work. And so it's got that self-sustaining feature. Now, there's probably one pyrotechnic certainly that you'll know very well, and we probably have just kind of grasped.
Yep.
I love gifts here, so I thought this was a very beautiful one, a lovely fireworks display going on.
Not too many blues in there.
Exactly, right? See, this is what I'm talking about. I want to try and create those gorgeous blues. But yeah, fireworks, they were founded or created by the Chinese many, many moons ago. like gunpowder was actually one of the first ones that was really discovered. So that's a mixture of potassium nitrate, carbon, and sulfur. Now, weirdly, obviously fireworks are used for like your spectacular displays now, but originally, looking at some of the ways that they were designed previously, they used to use bamboo shoots and fill them with gunpowder and set them off on things like New Year's Eve. And it wasn't just for the spectacular display, it was believed that it would ward off evil spirits.
Okay.
It's actually got that sort of connection there as well. And of course, these sort of things, these fireworks they're loved by many, and they're used heavily in celebrations throughout the year, just like coming up with our bonfire night. We also had it back in July, where obviously we've got the American celebrations. There's a whole host of other celebrations that happen in July. One of which I found when I was doing a little bit more research for this was Canada have a World Fireworks Championship every year.
All right. Okay.
I don't know how that's gone this year, obviously, because one of the things I noticed was obviously because quite a few of our fireworks displays haven't necessarily been able to go ahead. The big public displays, I mean, festivals and all that were cancelled as well. Basically, consumer fireworks sales have went through the roof, to the point of them nearly like losing out on their supplies because neighbours were essentially competing to have the best display in their back gardens, which I'm sure we'll obviously be seeing very soon anyway for us as well.
Absolutely.
Out of interest, actually, what other kind of pyrotechnics do you think are available? What, like fireworks obviously are a key one, but can you think of any others?
I guess things that produce smoke. So you got like your theatrical, your flashbangs and things like that, smoke effects within the theatre.
Yeah.
I don't know if this counts, but in a lot of my own research, when we're making sort of a seismic shockwave, we use little kind of blank shotgun cartridges, so to sort of explode those, and that makes a shockwave in the ground.
Yep.
That's probably my own personal use of pyrotechnics.
Yeah, no, that fits very well with exactly how these are used.
Okay.
I've got another couple here just because, they're used quite often by us. Matches. I mean, that's one of the most simplest pyrotechnics that we've got. Is that little tip as a pyrotechnic composition. Obviously, we use these in everyday life.
Yeah.
Now, another one that most people don't think about, because most people, again, think about either the spectacular artistic effect of them or the sheer destructive effect. But they're also used in safety applications as well, and this is where they're really key, because you need something to react really, really quickly, and that's for your car airbags. Okay. If you didn't have pyrotechnics there, which like gassy pyrotechnic compositions, you wouldn't have that reaction that we need to produce that amount of gas so quickly. And of course, in an accident type scenario, you need something that will respond rapidly to that type of event. So pyrotechnics can be particularly useful in this avenue as well.
Right.
So that's just a few. Obviously, there's a whole host of other pyrotechnic applications, but those are the ones I wanted to kind of draw attention to.
Okay.
And I also wanted to give you a few facts and figures, because why not? The largest ever fireworks display, they had 810,904 fireworks set off in the Philippines in 2016. The whole thing took about an hour, 1 minute, and 32.35 seconds to run.
Right.
It's actually available on YouTube if you want to have a look.
That's remarkably precise, but fair play.
I know. But it was quite funny though, because obviously they had this goal, and obviously they deliberately want to work along with I guess the Guinness World Book of Records.
Yeah.
But it was a really rainy day, so it wasn't as spectacular as they hoped for, because the rain put a dampener on things.
Yeah, right.
Another little factoid for you. Disney happens to be the largest global consumer, spending about $50 million annually on displays. Now, in a lot of ways, that's not particularly shocking, given that many of the activities that the kids go to, especially at the theme parks, there'll be some sort of lovely theatrical display. So yeah, that Disney are the largest consumer for that.
I do remember actually that the first, we went to America when I was a kid with my family, and we were there for 4th of July. And I do remember that it was a fireworks display at Disney's Epcot Center that was the first time when I actually felt the firework rather than just seeing it. You know, the explosions were so massive that you could feel them just impact your chest.
Yeah. No, that's a good display. That is a very good display. And it shows the sheer volume of materials that they've used as well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's always good. Another little one. So your worldwide fireworks export sales back in 2019, that was about 994.2 million. So it's a lot of money in pyrotechnics, specifically in fireworks.
When you say they're being exported, who's the manufacturer there?
Typically, actually, China.
Okay.
But there is actually a whole host of nations. I've got a little Statista, which is actually quite a nice little site. They actually talk about the various different suppliers that have produced and exported the fireworks to places all over the world.
Yeah.
Simply because America tend to do it almost in the biggest kind of scenarios. I thought I'd include Americans' figures as well. So this year, in anticipation of the 4th of July celebrations, they imported about 40,700 tonnes of fireworks, which amounted to about 100 million. Now, of course, the plans didn't necessarily go the way that they were meant to, because all this was bought previously, but that doesn't mean that they've not been able to make good use of them. Another thing, I've not wrote it down, but obviously this is meant to be the Olympics year as well. So they had a lot of fireworks set up for that. Obviously, I think, what was it, Tokyo? Is it Tokyo? But they ended up doing their own in-house display.
Okay.
So again, I think that's possibly available on YouTube. Certainly one of my colleagues who was really interested in it, she sent me across that video, and that's spectacular. And again, the colouring and that it's out of this world. It's fantastic. And the last little thing was basically showing you consumer fireworks revenue, and it's basically just to highlight that we're not getting bored of fireworks anytime soon. It just looks like everyone is getting more geared up. Certainly in terms of your consumer fireworks and your display fireworks, they're always ramping up. Now this year, obviously, that's the figure for the past couple of decades, but that's more than likely going to dramatically increase this year because, as I say, there'll probably be quite a few more home displays rather than people venturing out to the larger displays that we get put on for us by the professionals.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Now this is going to move back into sort of my area, like what the sort of applications that I look at. So bear with me, because some of these are sort of military type applications, but that's not to say they can't be used in a sort of civilian type setting as well. So at the beginning, I mentioned the definition was you had specific required effects. So that's heat, light, smoke, sound, smoke, or gas. Now, if you're looking at heat, you'll use that in a sort of an igniter type application, just like I said with your match. You can set something running with that. You can use them as a delay, so basically as a nice little time delay, because they'll have a specific burn rate, so you can introduce a delay into a system. Light, obviously illumination. That's kind of accounted for already, even within the name. But signalling and tracking as well. So you can use various different flare compositions. And obviously that's a safety thing. So anyone who's out on a boat who's been lost at sea, they might have a signal flare that they'll use to try and basically highlight that they need someone else to come out. Sound. Again, simulator is one of the key ones here. So they can be used by, I suppose, the police and by military for training aids. When they're actually trying to basically work with the various different weapons to create various different scenarios. Smoke as well, you've got screening and signalling. So screening can kind of mask the people so that they are protected in some ways from enemy fire, because it makes them harder to see. And again, signalling as well. And they can also be used in, I guess, almost like you would see in airports where you've got that man on the ground. That can be with your signal flares, but you could also have smoke compositions in that same sort of capacity. And that last one, gas, which obviously ties in with the airbag that I talked about at the beginning, but we can also use it in terms of propulsion. So gunpowder actually can be used as a propellant as well. So it can basically throw things up into the air or throw things forward.
What sort of things get thrown up into the air or thrown forward?
Ejector seats, particularly.
Okay. So pilots and
people.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, propellants, obviously, when you're talking about shotgun cartridges, you still need propellant that will actually push that item out of the barrel of a gun. So you've got things like that would be used for as well.
Okay.
So this is talking more about how they specifically work. So a pyrotechnic reaction is an example of a condensed phase combustion reaction. So that's a burning reaction. It's specifically a surface process, and the reason I want to draw attention to it being a key surface process is because the various components are individual. It's not like you've just got one ingredient that does everything. You've got a mixture of materials, and it's that surface interaction between them that makes them work so well. So in terms of how these things can be ignited, I've got a lovely little chart here. So temperature, and this is against distance going along this pyrotechnic tube. Now at room temperature, nothing's going on. It's not got enough heat being generated to ignite the pyrotechnic. It's not until you start imparting heat into there that you can start to climb up till you reach essentially the ignition point. Now, once you've reached the ignition point, of course, that means that exothermic reaction is going to start. So that exothermic reaction, I said, heat's generated, so that heat then spikes up again. And that will continue to happen as the heat travels through the material, basically causing some of the decomposition gases or decomposition products to leave the surface, but heat is still penetrating through, as is indicated with this lovely little diagram here. Now, these arrows are basically just talking about how heat can be transferred into the material. So you've got heat obviously being generated by the reaction taking place. Now, that can happen through conduction, convection, and radiation. So your conduction kind of through your solids, your convection through kind of gases and liquids, and radiation, everything else. The reason I've got this little diagram at the side was basically to try and highlight that at the beginning of the reaction, so in this case and in here, your core is cold, because the heat hasn't been able to penetrate through to those lower layers, and that's really important so that in terms of the understanding of how these pyrotechnics function. So heat will be transmitted into there until essentially the reaction is complete, till everything's essentially decomposed. But these blue arrows are indicating those decomposition products are essentially falling away from the surface. The gases are generating and moving away, which obviously means they are getting a little bit colder, which is kind of what you're seeing here with this little pattern here, that the heat gradually it cools down further away from the reaction zone, essentially. And another thing, because it's a surface process that I thought was really important to tell you about, was the comparison between a loose powder, a pressed pellet, and when you confine a pyrotechnic composition. So I've got a few videos for you here. Okay. One of them being gunpowder, as I say earlier, potassium nitrate, carbon and sulfur. So this is one of our little demos. So that really rapidly burns.
All over pretty quickly, that one.
Yeah, really, really quick. And that's because that's got so much surface area. It's not compact in any way. So it's got all those little grains that are exposed, so they can all essentially set off at once.
Oh, that's what you're saying about it being a surface process, that there's basically more surface area for the heat to get to. Exactly. So if instead we use a pressed pellet, and now sadly it's not the exact same composition, but it kind of still illustrates the same idea. This is something we actually made on the Pyrotechnics course that I co-run. So this is a pyrotechnic composition, and it's a pressed pellet. Okay.
So you can see it's a little bit more controlled. It's not obviously as even, but it burns gradually down, almost like a kind of cigarette burn, for lack of a better sort of analogy. Now, I'm going to put the question to you first before showing you the video. What do you think would happen if instead of that pressed pellet, we actually put it into some sort of confinement? So this is what the gunpowder will be placed within. Right. What do you think would happen there?
So if you put the pressed pellet into the confined space?
Not necessarily the pressed pellet, but the loose powder into there. I mean, it can be tamped down as well.
Right. I think it's going to try and react, and it'll all start sparking or something like that.
Okay. Do you want to see? Now this is basically quite fast footage, so it's basically slow-mo capture. Just to try and make the most of it. Apologise, the video is not as great quality as I would like, but I'll put it on the big screen for you to see.
Okay. So it completely blows itself apart.
Yeah, pretty much. Basically, what's happened there with both your loose powder and your pellets, obviously they are exposed to the general atmosphere. So basically, all those decomposition products could just easily leave the surface because it's just transporting into the air. That happens with both of them. When you've got that confined in there, those gases, those decomposition products, they don't have anywhere to go. Right, so what that's doing is just those gases are held within it, builds up the pressure, and of course with increased pressure, you're increasing the rate of reaction, so everything happens a lot quicker, and it can produce a bit of a more violent response, which is kind of what you saw there. So that was completely destroyed. Yeah. It basically caused everything else to kind of shatter or break down at least to fragment. And that's what we were seeing with this lovely little cardboard box there as well. So we do this demonstration quite regularly at work to explain this exact sort of concern, that you really have to pay particular attention to the level of confinement you would introduce when you're working with pyrotechnics. Because if you don't get it right, it might not function properly and you could get an explosion on your hands rather than a controlled reaction. Like if you imagine a propellant where you've got something that's basically off-gassing it and it allows you to have that thrust. If you did something else and the container wasn't strong enough, could just go.
I'm kind of kicking myself here because I've seen the movie Armageddon, where they got to blow the asteroid apart, and all these military guys are starting to say, well, we just detonate a nuclear weapon on the surface of the asteroid that's going to strike the Earth. But then the drillers go, no, you got to drill right into the middle and confine it. So, hey, there's another application of pyrotechnics, right? It's saving the world from rogue asteroids.
Right. It's kind of leading into that anyway. So I'm a chemist by trade. That's my area. I'm a formulation chemist. So my job is to create those energetic mixtures to produce those required effects: the heat, light, smoke, sound, or gas. But without an engineering input, my work could be kind of in some ways meaningless, because it could just fizzle out. It could just be really boring in some cases, especially if it was like a firework that we're talking about. It really takes a multidisciplinary approach to really get the best out of a pyrotechnic system, because the engineering really guides what kind of containment you can use, will help tailor your delivery mechanism, and if you can get that all right, you'll get the best performance out of your pyrotechnics. So it's really important you do the two. Both of these will also influence your burning rate of your pyrotechnic. And your burning rate, quite nicely leading on to this, that will determine the energy release for your pyrotechnic composition, and therefore the temperature of the flame that you'll see, that you experience. But it also can determine the gas production that you would get from a propellant. So as I said, gunpowder can be used as a propellant here, so that's why it's quite useful to mention it here. If you've got worried about the gas production, of course, that's going to start imparting on the level of thrust you're going to see, so how much oomph you're going to get for that item, but also the internal pressure that's going to be experienced within that rocket motor casing. Now, I'll put this question, it's basically double-sided though. What do you think would happen if, using, say, that example, that fireworks rocket, what do you think would happen if you had too little gas production? What do you think would be the issues with that?
It wouldn't take off.
Exactly, but what could happen then as a consequence?
It'd stay on the floor and explode and be pretty catastrophic for everybody watching the fireworks display.
Exactly. So because obviously you've got a chain reaction, you've got a whole set of events that once you've set off that firework, it continues the rest of the reaction regardless of what's happened at the beginning. So you're going to get that explosion on the ground. What happens then if you had too much gas production?
Too much? Wow. Well, it's certainly going to take off. But maybe it burns too quickly before it actually detonates or something like that?
Close, but you're basically, this is going back to the containment. If you've got too much gas production, you could just destroy the container itself. And again, as much as you had an explosion on the ground before, you can still have an explosion on the ground on the too high scenario, because the whole casing has ruptured, which means it releases everything else on the ground level anyway, and it couldn't take all the way up to the heights that it needs to reach.
And then you've got all that uncontained powder that just reacts immediately, and it's a big explosion in a very short space of time.
Exactly. So it's really important that we always put these two things together, the chemistry and engineering, and make sure that we design the product so that it will behave the way it should. Now, going back to chemistry, as I say, this is my day job. So the basic reaction of a pyrotechnic system, you've got a fuel and an oxidizer. Now, your fuel can be, I've got a whole example in the next slide, but a fuel is as simple as like the fuels that you use to fuel your car. So your diesel and petrol, all those sort of things. The fuel as well that you fuel yourself with. I know fine well I couldn't survive without carbohydrates. I love them far too much. But carbohydrates can be used in that exact same way as well. Certainly sugar has been used as a fuel. And I mean, again, that's something I couldn't live without. Currently on my desk right now, I've got ginger biscuits and some Mentos. So yeah, I love my sugar. Oxidizer, of course, in the name, it sort of provides oxygen to the reaction so the reaction can take place. And that will produce products like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ideally, water, and if you've got metals in there, metal oxides and all that sort of stuff as well. And of course, heat. Now, we do typically add other ingredients, and that can help us because that can change the physical properties of the mixture, especially good for improving the safety and handling characteristics. So we'll add definitely things like a binder, because that can hold the fuel and oxidizer components together. And that's really important because you don't want things to separate out, because otherwise you end up with concentrated areas of a fuel, concentrated areas of an oxidizer, and then the burn profile is just uneven and it doesn't work the same way. You can also start to add ingredients that will influence both the burning rate and also introduce a special effect. So you could add specific metal salts, which will impart colour. And you can also add things like coolants as well to kind of help to control the flame temperature and therefore the reaction. So that basic reaction ends up extending out to have the special effect and still plus your heat. Now, I feel like it would be wrong of me not to have some sort of semblance of a periodic table in here, so I had to add this.
You can take the chemist out of the lab, but...
Exactly. For your elements that you would use for your fuels and oxidizers, so boron, carbon, aluminium, they're all heavily used in terms of your sort of fuels. Oxygen, of course, heavily used as an oxidizer, or within your oxidizer systems, as is actually nitrogen and your fluorine, which we'll talk about a bit later. It's these sort of materials, your metals, that really help to contribute towards the colours and the sparking effect that you see within pyrotechnics and fireworks. Now, I've given you a little kind of colour chart to what kind of colour you're going to see, depending on what metals you introduce. Okay. Aluminium glows really, really bright white. Like they tell you usually to look away from it, it's that bright. Right. Barium produces a lovely green colour, calcium orange, copper blue. Again, we've still got some finessing there because it can be quite a weak emitter. Potassium is purple, sodium yellow. And now the reason I put an exclamation mark there with the yellow is if you're really trying to tailor your specific colour, if you start adding sodium, that is such a strong emitter that can completely dampen the effect of the other colours. Right. So if you want to get, I don't know, another green or blue, just put the sodium to the side. Just
easy on the sodium.
Yeah, exactly. Go easy on the sodium. Strontium's good. It produces red. One of the other materials I haven't listed here, but it's one of my favourites for doing a flame test in front of the class, is lithium. That is a gorgeous colour of red, and that's really intense. So again, other things for me to work on in the lab when I want to develop more pyrotechnic systems. Now, these are just a few, going into a bit more detail of fuels, oxidizers and binders. So I already said some of the metals, your magnesium, aluminium can actually be used. But you can use non-metals as well, so boron, carbon. And as I said, with the carbohydrate idea, yeah, you can use compounds as well. So certainly sugar and starch have been well known to be used in this sort of capacity. Oxidizer, I haven't listed one specifically, but it's more how the metals are paired with materials. So we refer to them as oxysalts. So nitrates, chlorates, perchlorates. So gunpowder has potassium nitrate in there, but we can also use things like potassium chlorate and potassium perchlorate. One that probably would surprise people, especially given it's given this name rust. But iron oxide, the oxygen can be extracted essentially from the iron to provide oxygen for a reaction. You'll see these sort of things used in thermix, which we'll talk about in a bit. This is the only one that's really weird. When most people think of oxidizers, they will be like, right, okay, that's the oxygen. Fluorine, which is one of the halogens, which is why it's called a halocarbon, which is in group 7. That's basically a fluorine can react in the same sort of way. So rather than producing things like magnesium oxide, you produce magnesium fluoride. But it does oxidize the metal substance very, very well. In terms of your binders, you can have both natural or man-made. So a nice natural one that was used quite heavily in the past was things like beeswax. Man-made, imagine any kind of glue that you're probably going to use in a craft workshop or any kind of capacity. I mean, you might do your own DIY and stuff at home. These are the sort of things that can be used. The only thing that we always stress to be mindful of is watch for kind of any degradation by using one of these materials, because if it starts to degrade your fuel or your oxidizer, it's not going to be good for the whole recipe. They've got to work in harmony together rather than against each other. So it's always important to make sure you understand how they react together. And again, my key role, formulations. Now, I said it was a surface process. So this is why it's really important that we actually intimately mix the ingredients. I provided a little bit of an example. So this here is looking at essentially gas molecules. So if we imagine that that's one concentration of a fuel and one concentration of the oxygen is really coming from the air in this scenario. But the reason you've got the distinct colour of the sort of yellow and blue is because you're not necessarily got an even distribution of the gases going through it. Whereas if you instead move to a blowtorch, you've got that intense blue the whole way through. And the reason you can get that is because I'm sure you've probably worked with your own blowtorch. I've got one certainly in my kitchen cupboard. Not that I'm doing any kind of
credibility. I'm here actually, but I've run out of gas.
Oh yeah. But basically all you need to do is change the hole that's at the front of the blowtorch, and that allows oxygen to seep in. So it allows that pre-mixing of the gases, which is why you can control the temperature of the flame and how intense it is just by tweaking that slight setting on your blowtorch.
I'm thinking of that from old kind of like chemistry lessons at school with a Bunsen burner. You got that little valve on the bottom.
That's exactly how it works. Yeah, you're introducing the air into there so that you're getting more gases mixing. Gases mix really well. Liquids pretty well as well. It's the solids that are a whole minefield, and that's again something that we are trying to work on at the moment because the solids tend to be a bit more complex. The things we've got to be mindful of when we're mixing pyrotechnics, we've got to take account of things like your particle size. Are you working with a fine powder or a coarse grain? Do you have more than one particle size? So you start to tinker around with that. And not just that, because obviously if you've got fine powder, you've got more surface area. These things should typically burn a lot faster. But in terms of surface area as well, you've got that loose powder versus the pellet that I showed you earlier. So they're going to burn in a very different way. So it's important to understand how these things are going to behave. If you want to fine tune your burning rate, you can always vary the fuel oxidizer ratio. And again, that really comes from your own knowledge of knowing how these things are going to behave. You could also start to add something like a burning rate modifier. You could add coolants and things like that. And if it's not getting quite up to scratch in terms of the specification you want it to reach, then you can go back to the drawing board and maybe just start tinkering with the fuels and oxidizers that you actually use, and just go back to the drawing board and say, right, okay, that didn't quite work as well as I liked. Maybe try a different fuel and see how it behaves, or a different oxidizer. Now,
when you're thinking that, when you say it's not quite up to scratch, you mean that someone has a specification that says we want this thing to explode within half a second or something like that, and so you're not quite achieving that, so you got to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. Even if you go back to almost even simpler terms, if you're talking about a pyrotechnic delay, you might need it to burn at a very specific rate in order to achieve that time delay. So if you don't have that quite right and it burns too quickly, if it's say launching from something and you need that person to be able to be out of the air, the field essentially, so that it doesn't cause harm to them, you need to make sure that it burns at a slow enough rate that the reaction will progress when it's intended to, rather than too early. So it's really crucial to get those things right. Now, formulation is really based on experience. So the more we learn about the ingredients, the better place we are to try and reach these specifications a lot earlier. And I'm still working on that. I'm by no means am I an expert in any shape or form, but that's something. I mean, you build up that skill set even when you're doing cooking and things at home. I mean, I don't know if you've got any recipes that you use when you're baking a cake, and then you're like, oh no, it's a sunk, or it's done something. It's really that kind of practice and really knowing the process that will tell you if you've got the right product or not.
To be honest, my experience of cake baking is that it never goes terribly badly, but I'm always surprised how well it goes because I'm terrible at following the recipe in the first place. Just kind of throw it all in, and I'm sure something will come out the other end and it'll taste okay. But
and if not, add chocolate. Always will.
Right. If that's one thing I take away from this talk, that does me.
Yeah, it does, honestly. To get chocolate dipping sauce and you're covered. Now, lastly, because I feel like I have to highlight, obviously, pyrotechnic hazards in general. I will go into more detail about fireworks very shortly, though. Because pyrotechnics have so many applications, and because we've got so many different ingredients that we can use, it does mean that we've got a whole variety of stability values, sensitiveness, and the various outputs. Now, what I mean in terms of stability is actually the way that I suppose I could liken it is almost like the shelf life of foodstuffs. these materials can degrade over time if left for long enough. So it's always important you've got a monitoring process in place, but also knowing how long that they're actually likely to be feasible in terms of their use, which is why so many people actually will put certain things for disposal if they've not had a chance to use them yet. It's safer to dispose of them before they reach that end of life time than it would be if they waited till it had gone past that point. Sensitiveness is actually more talking about how easy these things are to initiate. How much energy do you need to set them off? And when I talk about primary explosives, they require basically nothing to set these things off. You look at them funny, they can go. And honestly, because you've probably done this. I certainly did it a lot when I was a kid, where you get the balloon and you stand that on edge and then your hair just goes kind of crazy scientist mode. That's because you've given off static. And the amount of energy you charge up essentially in yourselves, you can actually impart into an explosive and set it off. So that's really important that we understand those sort of values of these materials, because if they're that difficult to work with, we've got to put extra things in place to make sure we can handle them correctly. Output, of course, they can be quite quiet, so your lovely little matchsticks, or they can be really violently explosive, and it all depends, again, chemistry and engineering, what kind of setup that you've got. That will determine what kind of response you're going to get. In terms of other hazards that we might want to look at, we've also got COSH, so control of substances hazardous to health. Some of the materials, especially things like dyes that are used in smoke compositions, they can be things like toxic, carcinogenic, and mutagenic. So it's really important that we understand those, because obviously we're loading them out into the world. So it's really important that we know what kind of risks are presented within the chemicals being used. And we can also get mixture incompatibility. One of the key things we're told that we're not, by law, that we're not allowed to mix together is sulfur and potassium chlorate. And that's really regarding your stability, because these materials do not behave well together. You can get an unintended event just by putting these two together. Okay, I don't know if you watched that. Did you watch Taboo? That thing with Tom Hardy in it? It was yeah. They were talking about introducing, I think it might have been sulfur that they were trying to add, and they said also they really got to carefully watch, and you saw the guy stirring it really slowly.
Yeah.
Changes the whole dynamics of the system. So that's why those things have got to be kept separate, and that also applies to a lot of the materials we use. If you're mixing fuels and oxidizers, typically you will have a separate fuel store and a separate oxidizer store, and obviously only take out the quantities that you need, because we know fine well they inherently will react together eventually, but we want to only use that when we want it to happen.
Yes.
So, the other thing was because the particle size is quite important. We're often working with fine powders, so of course with that you can get cross contamination, and there might be a respiratory hazard associated with that. Now the thing I suppose I always like to say about this one is, when you, again, going back to cake analogies, clearly I've got a problem with cakes.
I don't think it's a problem at all.
But icing sugar. If you're ever pouring out icing sugar just to get your lovely icing on top of your cake, you typically will taste it even when you're just pouring it out, because obviously it ends up being clouds of the stuff. So that's why it's really important that we wear things like respirators and things like that to make sure that they don't enter us essentially and cause us any harm. So it's really important that we're aware of those sort of risks. I did want to just go on to say other things that we're wanting to look at as well. So going forward, as I say, those dyes aren't necessarily the nicest of things to use in some cases, but one of the other inherent challenges that we have is we're still using things like heavy metals. So barium is one of the ones in particular. As much as that produces a gorgeous green colour, we are trying to find safer and more environmentally friendly methods and ingredients. So I've just put in a few papers that have came out more recently, but chlorine, barium and lead are the key things we're really trying to rule out in the various different energetics that we work with at the moment.
Now, at this point, I'm just going to give a shout out to my friend Claire, because when I told her that we were going to do a quantum source on sort of pyrotechnics technology and what sort of questions might she ask, she said, I wonder if they're environmentally friendly. So it would seem maybe they're not, but we're moving towards a place where they might be.
Yeah, I mean that I think that'd be a fair assessment. We're trying to do our utmost to make sure that there are better alternatives out there, and that we actually consider our various different pyrotechnics almost like from cradle to grave. So rather than just saying, right, we're going to burn them at a random burn ground, is there something else that we can actually do to help almost remediate the soil? I mean, we've actually got a group at Centre for Defence Chemistry at Cranfield University that is their main focus, is on the environmental effect of explosives, and can we do something now to improve upon our typical practices to make sure that we're actually doing right by the world. Because I mean, certainly environmental legislation has really ramped up more recently in the past few years, which means obviously there's been a lot more groups studying this sort of behaviour and what things can we do to counteract the damage that's been done already.
All right, cool.
Yeah. And also, so this is ingredients based, so that's really looking at the chemistry. There's also the processing requirements. Now, I really want to get even more involved in this area, but looking at 3D printing. Now, of course, the typical type of 3D printing when you're talking about your plastics, I think it's ABS and PLA are the two typical ones they talk about being used. Now, we can't just put like a block of energetic material and just heat it up and then dispense it. I don't think anyone would like that, and we'd probably get into disaster quite quickly. So we are having to investigate other types of route, like almost like squeezing out a paste, like almost like out of a syringe, and then trying to set it up in that way. Now, the great thing, of course, with 3D printing is that you can get those really intricate shapes. So you can really start to fine-tune the burning profile of a pyrotechnic just by doing that. I mean, I just included this as a funky little shape, but I mean, just imagine the kind of burning profile that's going to have. If you imagine that almost like as a cylinder, that's going to completely change the different rates that you can achieve. Now, this would be really hard to try and achieve using almost like a die type setup where you push something through almost like a Play-Doh type device to get a particular shape. Whereas if you can do that with 3D printing, all the better.
Yeah.
So it's quite a funky avenue to go forward with.
And so I know I keep like generalizing this in terms of fireworks, but the implication here is that you'd get all sorts of different shapes of starbursts or something like that.
Quite possibly as well, actually, because you could be depositing various, like some of the aerial shells that I've seen, you'll have maybe your gunpowder deposited that's embedded with various, what they refer to as like almost stars, and it's those that are spread out and explode. But you could almost create that in a 3D printed setup and just start fine-tuning the placement of those star products. So there's lots that could be achieved with it. I mean, that's not necessarily being done right now, but that's where you can envisage it going.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And another processing technique, and now I did have this video, again, you don't think you really need sound for this one, but this is a thing that the energetic materials community are really looking heavily into. And the thing that makes me laugh is this technology, when it was first coming out, I remember the first video I seen, I think, was basically someone was using it to mix up a cocktail. So again, a little link, and baking cakes as well.
That's very much in the quantum source spirit, I have to say.
Exactly, right? But this one is basically showing you, instead of a hand mixer, which obviously used to bake cakes, I mean, we use essentially a larger scale version of that for various energetic mixtures that we produce. With pyrotechnics, again, because they can be quite sensitive, we might have to use a very different approach. And it can be as simple as literally tumbling the powders together because we want it to be very gentle. This one works in that same sort of capacity, as in there's no blades involved. And of course, if you've got any blades, that acts as a friction source, a potential friction source. So trying to avoid that would be quite ideal.
Tiny matches going off inside the mixture, right?
Exactly. We don't necessarily want that happening. But this is showing you this working. So it's quite rapid, but this is obviously on a very high-speed video camera capture. Right. But it's got a really quick response in terms of being able to mix these materials together. And the great thing is you don't have that cleanup process at the end either, because you've got everything you want in the container, and that can be set aside.
Yeah.
So lots being able to be achieved by that. It's basically this is a mixer that basically works by having a base plate loaded on a set of springs. And it's those springs that are bouncing at a specific frequency, and it's influenced by like the weight of the container and the contents. But you can start to tailor your specific process depending on what you've actually got in the container.
So it literally is kind of like one of those, a cocktail shaker.
Yeah, in all essence, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
And I think that was my main bit sort of looking forward. But again, because it's fireworks, I feel like I've really got to stress the safety. I mean, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't also caring very much about the public and what we've got to do here. Like you said at the beginning, do not drink alcohol if you're planning on setting off fireworks. That recipe does not go well. Another thing I kind of want to say with that as well, obviously we're being told that we've got to really carefully wash our hands. Lots of people are using hygiene gel. Wash your hands. Don't use hygiene gel if you're getting yourself near the fireworks. The whole point of hygiene gel working is it's high in alcohol. So you're going to get alcohol on your finger, on your hands by using hygiene gel. So I encourage you to wash your hands because you're not getting that same alcohol level imparted onto your hands. So that puts you at less risk. Do follow the instructions for each firework. They've been written up that way for a reason. If you're going to set off a firework, light them at arm's length. You don't want them close to you, especially if you've got longer hair like me. Stand well back, of course. Never go near a firework that has been lit, even if it hasn't gone off. It could still explode. As we said earlier, if there's a problem with it, you could get an explosion on the ground in either case if there's too much pressure, if there's too much gas or too little gas. So it's really important to stay in a safe zone away from the fireworks. Don't put them in your pocket. I hope no one would. And don't throw them, especially in public places. Last two is obviously for sort of looking at children as well. So making sure that you're supervising children when at fireworks displays or back in the back garden. Don't give sparklers to kids under 5. Keep pets indoors. I mean, they have higher senses than us, which is why they're much more sensitive to it. I mean, their hearing is out of this world. Their sense of smell. They do get really quite nervous about that. So keeping them indoors, make sure that they're safe as well is really key. Of course, this is one of my last little things is be respectful of your neighbours. Now, fireworks generally shouldn't be set off past 11 p.m, but of course we do have an exception for bonfire night. Yay. Midnight is our end goal for there. But of course with New Year's Eve and Chinese New Year and Diwali, if I'm saying that correctly, it extends to 1 a.m. because you can't have New Year's Eve and then be cut off at 12. It just wouldn't work.
Yeah.
These are our research focused themes at Cranfield. So I'm based within the defence and security area, but we do also do aerospace and energy and power, the environment and agri-food, school management, manufacturing, transport systems and water. So if you have any interest in any of those areas, do feel free to get in touch. We are definitely encouraging collaborations. We've got our Cranfield Community and we'd like to work with others. I'm an early career researcher myself, which is why I really like embellishing the ECR acronym. So I like to think about it as eclectic collaborative research. We also do knowledge exchange partnerships. So that's basically an effort to try and basically help provide solutions for challenges that industry face. So if we can provide some expert advice in there, we can hopefully solve the challenges that they might face. If it's a larger project, you could think about making it into a master's or PhD research project. Also, for the fun lovers out there are short courses. The EOE Pyrotechnics, which is the course I co-module manage. That's a great one. We get to make pyrotechnics and then set them off on the Friday as well. So you get to almost compete against the other students to see who's made the best ones. And the last point is the Centre of Excellence in Energetic Materials, COIM. Now, I called it Explosives Talent Retention, and that's really key because there's obviously plenty of people who are leaving this field now, who are now at the age of retirement. We want to make sure that we inject that enthusiasm still into our area and make sure that we've still got the people who understand the various aspects of energetics, whether that be for fireworks displays, safety engines, and all that sort of stuff. So it's really important that if you are interested in this field or you're already working within that field, do get in touch because we're trying to make sure that we're working as a community now to make sure that we've got the talent maintained for the UK.
All right. Thanks very much. Let's get you to unshare screen.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Lisa. It was really informative insight into the world of pyrotechnics. I am going to bring it back to fireworks just for 1 second, though. In that, other than blue ones, what is your favourite firework family?
Oh, I have to say probably still like the classic of your Catherine wheel, because I've always been fascinated by how the movement, because obviously you can get all the ones that literally they sparkle like that, sparkle outward, but that... It's just the movement just fascinates me.
I actually feel I've got like a lot more credibility than I did 5 minutes ago now, because Catherine Wheel is what I was going to say as well. So yeah, I'm in the same ship as the pyrotechnics expert. So yeah, that's cool. But if you could get a blue Catherine Wheel, then how awesome would that be?
Yeah, that'd be spectacular.
That would make your bonfire night.
Yeah, definitely would.
Cool.
I'll be back in touch when that happens.
Nice one. I want video evidence. Right. In that case, Lisa, we'll leave you to your bonfire week. Thanks again for your contribution to Quantum Source. I would say to everyone out there that you saw that there were some social media links at the end of Lisa's talk there, but I think Lisa herself is on Twitter, and I'll tweet her from the Quantum Source Twitter account. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to put to her, then I'm sure she'd be happy to take those.
Yeah, most definitely.
All right, cool. Well, I'll say thanks again, and we'll leave you to enjoy that White Russian.
I will do. Thank you very much.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
So thanks very much to Lisa for that insight into the wonderful world of pyrotechnics research. You heard it from Lisa. Whatever you're doing during Bonfire Week, do stay safe. I think it's best that I, having finished my adult cocoa, that I just sit back on the patio and watch the firework displays go by. If you enjoyed that, then we will be posting more videos for Bonfire Week, and indeed there's a whole record of locked down specials from over the summer to keep you educated and entertained. Just check out the Quantum Source Twitter and Instagram feeds. Just remains me to say that I've been Dr. Adam Booth, this has been Quantum Source, you've been great, stay well, stay cool.